This is House Planning Help, episode 295. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in your way. Coming up, we start a mini-series on utilities, and you may well want an electricity supply, so how do you connect? That's what we're talking about today. My guest is Neil Clarke, Head of Connection Services, Highway Services and Disconnections at UK Power Networks. That in a moment, but first, just a quick request. Every few months, we try and plan out at House Planning Help. What is it that we need to cover in the next few podcasts or blog posts or whatever videos it might happen to be? And that's where your input becomes very important. At the beginning of each year, we put out a survey, so please get involved in that. But also just a simple question that applies whenever you're listening to this. And that is, what's your biggest challenge at the moment? I would love to know. And if you get in touch through the contact pages on houseplanninghelp.com, you may well find me replying to you. Either I'll be saying, well, have you checked out this or that or the other? Or I'll be saying, oh my goodness, a gaping hole there. And it's amazing after, almost approaching 10 years now of doing this, we're going to have plenty of holes. I don't think this will ever be finished. And as we always say from these podcasts, we don't necessarily make them comprehensive, but we try and come at this from as many different angles as we possibly can and look at all the different issues you may have. So that's what makes it exciting for me, that we'll never be finished, but it's always nice to find out about new things that will particularly help you on your project. So drop me a line. Let's get to our featured interview with Neil Clarke from UK Power Networks. And we've certainly talked about connecting utilities to site before, but probably not dedicated episodes to that, which is why I decided we're well overdue for a mini-series on this. And we're going to start by looking at connecting a new electricity supply. How exactly do you do that? That's what we're going to discuss with Neil Clarke. And I started by asking Neil to tell me a little bit about himself.
Just over 50 years of age. I've been with the company 32 years, man and boy. So I started at the bottom, worked my way up. And currently I head up connection services. So that's our small service arena. So that's your everyday households, new builds up to 4 plots, up to 3-phase 100 amps. But I also look after highway services. So if you walk down a high street, anything that's terminated on a high street, I also manage. So that's your bus shelters, speed cameras, street lights. So majority is the 54 local authorities across our 3 licence areas, plus your larger street furniture customers, your BT, your Openreach, your Virgin Medias. I also look after all the disconnections, the LV disconnections for the company as well. So these are your builders that want something demolished in readiness to do a new build, or people that are just moving or knocking 2 premises into one.
Maybe we could just find out a bit more general stuff. For example, how long has the electricity grid existed? It must have taken a while to sort of piece together, but what's the background of it?
Started in sort of the late 1800s. The first sector to go live was the public lighting, bizarrely, which I now look after. But electricity spread from that time really up to probably the mid 1900s, where it's now sort of broken down into 12 separate regions throughout the country, of which they're owned by 6 different companies. We own 3, so the Eastern Network, the London Network and the South East Network. So as you look at a map of England, the far sort of right-hand bottom corner is UK Power Networks. So we're not the grid, we don't generate or transmit electricity. We are the distribution side, so we look after and maintain the wires, the substations, to get to the homeowners to make sure that their lights and power is kept on.
And how come it's not just one big area that's looked after? Is there a reason that it developed in that way?
Competition and lots of other reasons. Obviously, it was privatised and obviously went down its own routes a number of years ago, whichever companies chose to invest really. So I'm not sure whether the government would allow one person to own all of it. But as I say, we currently own 3. So no real reason, really. It's just a competitive market.
Is it always growing, this network, or are some people disconnecting at the same time as new installations are coming across?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a bit of both, really, because The smaller developments seem to be disconnected and they put a larger building in its place. So now I don't look after the major projects, but you can clearly see, I mean, if you look at the London skyline, you can see buildings going up all the time. But the market I'm in, is it a growing market? It's been static for many, many years. Now, we can only grow so many, but competition's out there. So although there's probably a bit more work out there, there's more competitors out there.
How many new connections do you make as a business then each year? And are we talking all, any building basically?
Yeah, so if I solely look at small domestic, so in our world it's known as connection services, small services. So we have about 60,000 inquiries a year, which generates about 24,000 quotations. And the take-up of them quotations is quite high. 60% plus that we're doing. But on the flip side of that, as you say, we're doing many disconnections and other bits and pieces. And then quotations are not always for a new build. It could be for an alteration of a current service, or as I say, a disconnection, that metered service. The new element is, I'd say, about 40% of our overall connections that we do. So it is increasing year on year, but as I say, we're doing lots of disconnections as well. Mm.
Is the process always the same of this is how a connection works?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work on our website, and you'll see it's all been updated and refreshed. And we offer two different processes at the moment. So they would go online, fill an application form in. That'll flow through, and then we'll contact them. Or they can now actually request a site visit process. So you don't actually fill in an application form. You request someone to come to site. We'll come to site, meet you, talk you through that process, hold your hand, filling it in so you get exactly what you want. And then we'll process it through the system for you. So your regular customers who know our process will probably just fill the application and go. Those one-off ones, we assume, will want a bit more hand-holding and a bit more guidance through the process.
Maybe we can just talk through that then. So first of all, do we know our technical requirements beforehand? And I apologise if that's not a very good question.
No, and we get this all the time. And we try to break down all the technical jargon and everything else. But, if somebody's applying for something, then they know roughly what they want. The technicalities, usually they would have had an electrician involved and their electrician will guide them. So many applications we get will be from the electrician, but it's actually for the homeowner or a developer or a builder. But it's the electrician that works with us. If it's not, we will break it down and we'll explain to the customers what it means, what kind of supply they would need. I mean, most houses will be just a single phase 100 amp, and that will suffice most people. But if they've got larger machinery or larger pumps, your 3-phase pumps, depending on the size of the property, then we can do a 3-phase, which just evens out the voltage across each phase to make it better for them. Because all we're trying to do is, it's the integrity of the network, is to make sure that whatever we supply is sufficient for the homeowner, but also fits in with the network. And, in some instances, if it was a larger development, we may have to reinforce the network, and that's when it becomes very complicated. And that's why we've made this split between 1 to 4 and 4 above. Because it's 4 above, we know it's going to be a bit more than just a normal connection, or potentially some additional mains lay. So you're then assigned a project designer that would do exactly the same as that my staff do. They'll hold your hand through the whole process and make sure you get exactly what you need.
Now, for my particular self-build, I had a 3-phase coming to site, and then it was changed at that point. So I don't know much about that, but why would that happen?
Depends. I mean, if every site is obviously site specific. So depends if you're rural or urban. If you're in a rural area where there's no electricity, we may have to lay a 3-phase main that would get you up to your property, and then we would run a service off the end of that. We would look at volt drop and all the other bits and pieces and the size of the substation, and that technical check is done all behind the scenes. Now, it's included in the price. We do all of that. We work it all out for you and then come back to you with whatever you needed. So without knowing your job.
But that sounds about right. What you're saying there, yeah, we are fairly rural and it will have travelled from the road. One thing you brought up there, you mentioned, if you're quite rural, can you get an electricity supply to anywhere? It's just the cost.
Yes, yeah. In essence, yes. And a lot of people just take this into the equation before they start building, because they're going to struggle to get electricity there, they're going to struggle to get water there, they're going to struggle to get gas there. does it become viable to do that self-build? But yes, anything is possible.
And when you're digging trenches and so forth, presumably how long the cable is one price, but it's really at either end of that the real cost is. The cable itself isn't too bad, or is that false?
Obviously, there's a cost to everything we do. The reinstatement cost is probably the biggest cost, but every part of our work now is contestable, for new work. So I'm not talking about fault-related work where there's a potential issue there, but for new work, a customer can choose to do lots of elements themselves to bring the price down. If we're on a site, and there's a trench, and they've got the gas coming in, the water, that's where you want to start sharing the work together rather than having the trench dug out 3 times. If you go back 20, 30 years, that's probably where it was. The water would turn up, dig it out, then fill it in, then we would turn up, dig it out, fill it in. There's collaborative work in there because we all have to go through the local authorities for notices and permits, and they will now tell us if the gas are going in, if the water are going in, and that's when we start working together to reduce the cost for everybody and the disruption to obviously the residents and everyone around.
Yeah, and this is something that's been really historically tricky to do, hasn't it, to coordinate everything? It's obviously what we would all like, but out in reality, it's not quite so simple. So can you cross any road, any pavement? Is it just a matter of waiting until that permit can kick in?
We would apply to local authorities for whatever we're doing. That's all built into the price as well. So, we'll liaise with local authorities. It depends on the makeup of the road and other bits and pieces. But yes, in essence, we can cross many places. If there's high pressure gas mains there, then you have to follow a different process, because you would need somebody out there while you're doing that work for safety reasons. And depending how busy the road was and the width of the road and lots of other things, what classification it is. If we have to undertake a road closure, then we would have to give the local authority and the local residents 3 months prior warning, which just adds time to the job as well as cost, as you can imagine. But no, we've got local people that know the areas anyway, so we've got their expertise, but we now all go through each local authority, all on the same system. So in essence, we can see what everybody else is doing. And, if we're going onto a site, we will ask the customer, have you got the water coming in? Have you got the gas in? And we'll try and tie up with them so it minimises any disruptions whilst we're on site, but also allows the work to go ahead quicker and probably for the resident cheaper.
Can we talk a little bit about what it is, what the technical bits of kit might be coming into a detached house? I know it might vary a little bit, but anything, for example, you're going to need the cable in a trench, but anything like that, and then a meter, or whether that then crosses onto someone else's domain.
Yeah, so obviously our responsibility for UK Power Networks is up to the termination. We're not a supplier, so we're not metering. We're not a meter operator. So we literally do up to the termination. So from the house outwards, at the end of our cable, you'll have termination. Nowadays it'll be 100 amp, but historically that could be 60 amps or lower, depending on how old the termination of the property is. So we finish there. You've got the termination. You've then got our cable that comes out the property. Most homes would have a single or a 3-phase. That will come out the property into a ducting, usually on their property. It will run to the edge of the boundary line of that property. And from there, obviously, it goes out into the public footway where usually our main is. Or on some occasions, we may have to cross the road. It just depends where our main cable are located.
And are all those cables and so forth mapped these days? Again, I know this is a historical thing, but I just feel on one of our service connections, and I can't remember which one it was, we didn't actually know where certain things were.
Yeah, so all our mains cables are logged. They're on our system. We can see them. It's and I say competitions out there, so they're allowed to see theirs as well. So it's open for people to see. And anyone can request a set of plans. Go for our plans provisions teams that will provide them plans. There's a lot of myths around our cables are incorrect, but it's just not true. There's an element that our service cables in a couple of areas were not logged as vigorous as other areas, but it's a very small minority. And we can trace any of our cables out with the correct electrical equipment anyway. So even if you approached us for a new connection, I would send one of my surveyors out there. I have just shy of 100 surveyors. We will come out there, we'll map all the cables out, we mark them all out. We'll put them all in our drawings. That in conjunction with our actual cable records, he'll look at that to make sure what he's found does tally up. If ever we find it that it doesn't, then we'll record that, and obviously then we'll get some people out there to get it matched correctly, which does happen on occasions. But that could be for lots of reasons. Our records may be incorrect, or it may be that the local authority have changed the road layout, so the footpath is no longer where it shows, or a developer has done something slightly different. So there's lots of reasons why. But no, in the main, we know where our cables are. They're our assets. As you can imagine, as we've inherited by different companies over the years, we've either invested more than previous and at our current status. I mean, we're investing probably £600 million every year on the network and improving it, and to make sure we can maintain it and see where all of our equipment is. So I think it's a bit of a myth, to be honest. But I can't sit here and say, no, 100% they're accurate. Of course, ground levels change, and we have to deal with that, unfortunately, when we arrive on site.
Yeah, it obviously wasn't electricity. It must have been one of the others, but I just thought that was interesting. So what about safety then? We're talking about electricity, which we know you need trained people for. So how do you tap into the main without causing any problems?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I mean, safety is our number one priority. It is embedded in everything we do across UK Power Networks. So all the staff are fully trained. They have to go on refreshers every 6 months, a year, to keep their competency up. We have what's called a WAP process. And this is where we go out and physically inspect the guys, test the guys every 6 months. Part of a 2-year cycle, they must have 3 of these tests. But now, on top of that, we do behavioural exchanges on these and audits on the staff each week, each month. Every one of my team would have a behavioural exchange done on them, which is a safety conversation. So we'll go out, we meet them, we watch them working, and they have to have one of them every 6 months. But no, on top of that, we do monthly briefings. We have what's called a First 15, which is a safety briefing that all staff, so not only our jointers and our linesmen and engineers that work outside, this is all staff and office staff. Now, we make it bespoke to them, just to reiterate safety to them. But no, to become a jointer, I mean, I was a jointer many, many years ago. It was a 4-year course that has condensed now, because back then they were obviously lead-covered cables, all our cables now are plastic. But now we take on apprentices every year. We take on adult trainees, adult engineers, and train them efficiently to work on our network.
And how many people are we likely to have coming to a site? Or again, is that how long's a bit of string?
Yeah, again, it's site specific, but I mean, for safety reasons, our staff work in twos. So our field staff, so if they're linesmen, they will come in twos. Jointers will come in twos. Our civils, that's where it slightly changes, because if I've got 2 jointers coming out, it may be that we put 1 civils with them, so it'd be a 3-man team. But in some other areas, especially in towns, and especially in London, we'll probably set up a separate civils gangs. But for most reasons, you'll get one of my surveyors coming to site just to check on the job, and although we guide you through the job, that surveyor will also turn up a couple of days before the work is planned, just to make sure you've done everything or you need any other questions answered. So you'll probably see my surveyor a couple of times. You'll then see a civils gangs, which is 2 people, a jointing gang, which is 2 people, and then a reinstating team, which could be the same as the civils one, or if it's a specialist top, a separate one. So most times you'll probably see 4 different entities coming to site for our work.
What factors affect the cost? And have you got any examples of, again, we're generally interested in detached buildings. Yeah, so
obviously every job is site specific. Obviously there's a basic cost. So we know what the cost is to supply a new supply into a house. And that usually covers up to 40 metres, which would cover most properties. Anything above 40 metres, then we may have to start, as you mentioned earlier, laying a 3-phase cable to stop the volt drop and other bits and pieces. So that's when the prices would start rising. So it depends on the length of the service. Over 43 metres, it would be slightly more. If it's detached or a terraced house, there should be no difference in the cost. It's just the actual location. So it's usually the distance from the road, or from the edge of your boundary, I should say. And then when we get out into the road, it just depends, as I said earlier, on the makeup of the road. So if we need a road closure, that adds costs. If we need specialist traffic management, Now, we live in a very safety world at the moment, and as you can imagine with street works, there's a lot of focus on street works at the moment. Lots of the rules have changed, whether it be red routes or parking bay suspensions. All of these would add cost to the job.
What about going overground versus underground? Is there any reason why you choose one over the other? Is that a cost thing as well?
No, not necessarily. I mean, there's a safety implication. We do not particularly want to be working at heights. So where practically possible, we will manage out working at heights. But if it's a rural area, and the only supply is overhead, then we would supply that property overhead. But where we can, even if it is overhead, we would run it underground into the property. So we can try and, eliminate that risk. I mean, there's lots of negativity around areas of natural beauty and our overhead lines, and that's why we've got lots of schemes where we're trying to underground lots of our cables at the moment. But no, it's site specific, and if a customer came to us, we've got to give them the most competitive, cheapest option that we can. Okay, so we can't choose to say, you're going to have it underground and it's going to cost you X amount more. We have to give them the most competitive price we can.
And how far underground does it go?
Depends. I mean, if it's in the road, we would say a metre down, or a minimum of 600. And if it's in the footway, it's usually a minimum of 450 deep.
And that's just a safety thing again, that no one's going to put a spade in there and start digging it up?
Yeah, exactly that. But as I say, I mean, lots of roads and footways get altered for many different reasons. But yes, if we land new cables, it would be 450 deep on the footway going into the customer's premises.
And the cables that are in there, obviously you mentioned plastic earlier, but what's in the middle of that? Is it just a solid core?
Yeah, so at the moment it's a solid aluminium core covered, and it's a copper neutral, which also acts as the earth nowadays. But in the old days, it was what we know as a PILC cable, so it's paper insulated lead covered. So these are, when you look in the ground, you see these older, people, they're crumbling, they're old, but they're not. It's just a casing that's around it. Under that casing is lead, and inside that lead would be a couple of cores. They would historically have been copper, which is why they're slightly smaller. But no, aluminium is an excellent conductor, which is why we use it, and cheaper. If we start using copper, I think it would just add to the price as well.
Now, a couple of things that I wanted to ask you about time frames and so forth, because we had our supply connected when the house was there. It was pretty much ready to go. But how early in the process can you go? Can you go to just a field?
So if you was just setting out, yes, we would meet you on site. We would advise you probably to install a TBS, so a temporary builder supply, while you're doing the work. So yeah, we can put a supply into a field as long as it's going into a lockable, waterproof housing, safe from the elements, safe from the general public. It's on your property, so it's under your control. But we would classify that as a TBS. So it's a meter cabinet, so it would have a door on the front. It's, as I said, lockable, waterproof. But no, we can come in earlier if it suits you, but it would be put into a temporary builder supply, and we can then make that into a permanent supply if needed when you were ready.
And what about time frames then, if we did want it for the beginning of our construction? So what's a typical time scale? Let's say we wanted to start building the house. Should we get this all in motion first?
So we work on the premise that it's the customer's wishes. The minute you apply to us, we have to raise a quote within 5 days. So we'll come to site, we'll meet you, we'll arrange all of that. Now, bear in mind, if a customer applied today and he said to me, can I meet you next week? That's out the 5 days. So we always try and push where we can, but as I say, it's down to the customer's wishes. And once you've paid that quotation, which is down to the customer, when they pay, but the minute that's paid, the clock starts ticking, and we will connect that. Now, ideally, we would do that within 25 days. But the problem is, again, it's down to the customer. So if they say we're not going to be ready for a couple of months, then obviously they will drive the program date. But what I can tell you is, within the small service arena, we give the customer a date of their choice. All we will do is probably 5 days before that date is just call the customer, have that conversation. Are you ready? Anything else you need to know? Anything else you need from us? And then a couple of days before we're due on site, we will do a drive-by just to stop, make sure you're okay, make sure you're ready, give you some guidance if you're unsure. because all we want to do is make sure that work goes ahead on the day, because you end up with wasted costs for all of us if it doesn't go ahead. So timeframes are usually within 27 days.
And what about when we pay? Is it all one lump sum, or is something needed up front?
Yeah, it's usually one lump sum. I mean, as I said, I do up to 4 properties. If it's larger than that, it's a lot more money. There's probably some staged payments and other bits and pieces. But for our smaller developments, no, it's payment up front. And once it's paid, obviously, we can process that to the next stage of the programme deliver and close.
Now, you've obviously seen a lot of these over the years, quite interesting on different sides when you've been down on the sites as well, doing all the work. Is there an area we need to watch out for where things might go wrong, or where we could be better as self-builders?
All I would say is just early intervention. So early conversations with us. So whether it's a disconnection, and I'll give an example of a disconnection. A site will demolish the site, but leave our terminations standing there in the middle. Now just tell us at an early stage, because it could be dangerous. It could cause a problem. And God forbid anything was to happen to any of us or our customers. So no, early intervention. So contact us as soon as you know. Even if you're just inquiring or you want to understand the process or how much it's going to cost, or contact us as early as you can in the process. We will guide you through the whole stages of how we work, what you will need to do. Obviously, we're not the supplier, as I mentioned earlier, so there's always a third entity, because if it's a new supplier, you're talking to us, you've got an electrician, then you've also got to talk to your meter operator, which we're not. Now, whoever you choose, then that's another one in the mix that we have to try and collaborate all the working together. So all I'd say is early intervention with us. Once you've made contact with us, we will give you one point of contact. So you'll have one person that will deal with your job from start to finish. And we will do all the running around behind the scenes of the delivery and talking to all these other entities to make sure that job happened correctly.
Well, Neil, I really appreciate your time today, and hopefully you found my questions all right.
No, that's fine, but I appreciate your time.
Get more online in our show notes today at houseplanninghelp.com/295. You can review the key points once again, take a look at a few photos of a connection. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, well, you can either do that within the show notes, or we've got the link to social media. We've got the main website, UK Power Networks, houseplanninghelp.com/295. My call to action is to check out the Hub. This is our membership community that we run alongside House Planning Help. And the idea being that we're giving you some extra support, really. It's a digital archive there that we're constantly building up. For example, this month, we've added another training session. This is from self-builder Dean Scott, who moved into his project, must be about 9 months ago now. So he built the cube at Graven Hill, and he's prepared insights from his own build. We always love these, and it's great to interact as well. And actually, I've forgotten this, Dean was a Hub member as well. So that's great to see another Hub member cross the finish line. We're notching them up here. It's taken a few years. It obviously does, because building a house is never as straightforward as you might think. But that is the purpose of the Hub, that we're trying to set you up for success, fill you in on what you need to know. We've got the in-depth video case studies, the courses, the members-only forums, so you can surround yourself with like-minded people. And of course, you're welcome to input from me, either in the forum or as part of office hours, which are really Zoom calls where we can just have a chat. houseplanninghelp.com/join. We'd love to help you on your project. Right, that's it for another session. Thank you so much for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.